When we look back at the economic landscape of the 1950s and early 1960s, our modern perspective is entirely distorted by the lens of our current financial reality. Today, we live in a completely frictionless, digitized, and largely imaginary financial ecosystem. We tap a piece of glass to order a meal, we swipe a plastic card to purchase a television, and we finance our automobiles over an agonizing span of 84 months. The concept of purchasing something with money that we do not actually possess is not just normalized in the 21st century, it is the fundamental required engine of our entire modern economy. Debt has been aggressively rebranded by corporate marketing departments as building credit, a necessary, sophisticated tool for adulthood. But if you were to take a modern credit card, travel back in time to the year 1955, and explain the concept of casual, unsecured revolving debt to a mid-century father, he would not look at you with envy. He would look at you with absolute, unadulterated horror. To understand the 1950s household, you must first completely abandon your modern understanding of money and step into a world where cash was king and debt was viewed not as a financial tool, but as a profound, shameful moral failing. The adults who were raising children, buying homes, and driving the explosive post-war economy in the 1950s were carrying a deeply hidden, invisible psychological trauma that dictated every single financial decision they made. They were the survivors of the Great Depression. These were the men and women who, in their most formative childhood and teenage years, watched the absolute collapse of the American banking system. They remembered the terrifying, visceral reality of bank runs, where panicked neighbors rushed to local financial institutions only to find the heavy iron doors locked and their life savings evaporated into thin air. They remembered watching proud, hard-working men, their own fathers, reduced to begging for day labor, unable to provide food for their families because the credit systems had completely frozen. This was not a chapter in a history book for them. It was a deeply personal, humiliating trauma. That level of systemic financial terror leaves a permanent, undeniable scar on the human psyche. Because of this, the generation that built the 1950s suburban utopia harbored a deep fundamental mistrust of banks, a terrifying fear of owing money to anyone, and an absolute, unshakable belief that if you could not pay for an item with physical, tangible paper cash, you simply did not have the right to own it. In the tightly knit conformist communities of 1950s suburbia, your financial reputation was your most valuable, carefully guarded asset. While a mortgage on a new suburban home was considered an acceptable, necessary, and respectable form of structured debt, borrowing money for everyday consumer goods, clothing, furniture, vacations, or household appliances, was accompanied by a crushing social stigma. If word spread through the neighborhood that a family was drowning in consumer debt or that they were frequently borrowing cash from relatives to make ends meet, they were quietly but severely ostracized. It was viewed as a direct failure of masculine provision and a failure of feminine household management. To owe money was to be physically vulnerable. It meant that another man, a bank manager, or a local merchant had power over your family's security. This fear created a society of aggressive, unyielding savers. The mid-century American dream was not built on the back of easy credit and monthly installments. It was built on a foundation of delayed gratification, intense patience, and the slow, agonizing accumulation of physical dollars. Welcome back to Vanished Americana. In our previous investigations, we uncovered the brutal physical labor required to stretch a dollar in the mid-century home, from darning socks to saving bacon grease. But today, we are going to explore the psychological architecture of that frugality. We are going down the rabbit hole of the cash-only dream. We will explore how our grandparents navigated a world without plastic, how they funded Christmas without credit, and how the terrifying ghosts of the Great Depression forced an entire generation to live with a level of financial discipline that modern society has completely, tragically forgotten. If you find yourself fascinated by the unvarnished truth of how our ancestors actually lived, please take a second to hit the subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement is the only way we can continue to dig up these lost pieces of American history and bring them to light. Now, let's travel back to a time when money was something you could actually hold in your hand. And let's examine the ruthless, beautiful discipline of the cash envelope system. To truly comprehend the financial reality of the 1950s, we must examine the most critical, tense, and important ritual of the week: Friday payday. Today, payday is an invisible, silent digital event. A computer server in a bank communicates with a server at a corporation, and numbers magically change on your smartphone screen. You never see the money, you never touch the money, and as a result, you never truly feel the psychological weight of the money leaving your account when you tap your phone to buy an overpriced cup of coffee. In the mid-20th century, payday was a deeply physical, tactile, and momentous occasion. The working father was handed a physical paper check, or in many industrial and blue-collar jobs, a small manila envelope filled with actual physical cash and coins. He brought this physical manifestation of his week's labor, his sweat, his time, and his physical energy, directly home to the kitchen table. And it was at this kitchen table, usually on Friday evening under the warm glow of a pendant light, that the true financial genius of the 1950s housewife was executed. This brings us to the legendary, uncompromising financial architecture known as the envelope system. The housewife would sit at the table with the cash, a sharp pencil, and a stack of plain paper envelopes. She would physically divide the week's earnings into highly specific, non-negotiable categories. There was an envelope for the mortgage, there was an envelope for the electric bill, an envelope for the heating coal or oil, an envelope for the church tithe, which was often considered untouchable. And, most importantly, there was the envelope for groceries. This physical division of currency created an absolute, unbreakable psychological barrier that modern budgeting apps simply cannot replicate. When you have an app on your phone that tells you that you have overspent your grocery budget, it is merely a digital suggestion. You can still swipe your card and seamlessly pull money from your savings or plunge into a negative overdraft balance without feeling a thing. But in 1955, when the grocery envelope was empty, it was physically empty. There was no magic card to swipe. There was no digital transfer to make. If the grocery envelope was depleted by Wednesday, the family ate whatever scraps were left in the pantry, beans, rice, or cheap homemade bread, until the following Friday. The psychological discipline required to maintain this system was staggering. The housewife was the ultimate gatekeeper of the physical cash. She possessed the profound mental fortitude required to look at a beautiful new dress in a department store window, feel the physical weight of the cash sitting in the mortgage envelope inside her purse, and actively choose to walk away. Borrowing from one envelope to fund another was considered a catastrophic breakdown of household management, a slippery slope that led directly back to the terrors of poverty that they remembered from their childhoods. The physical nature of the money forced a constant visceral awareness of its finite limits. When a mother went to the local grocer, she carried the grocery envelope with her. She watched the cashier tally the items on a heavy mechanical register. She physically handed over the paper bills, feeling the texture of the money leaving her fingers, and she carefully counted the silver coins returned in change, placing them back into the envelope. This tactile exchange triggered pain receptors in the brain that modern credit cards are specifically designed to bypass. You felt every single penny you spent. This strict cash environment also meant that unexpected expenses were terrifying emergencies. A blown tire on the family car or a sudden dental emergency could completely shatter the delicate equilibrium of the envelopes. Because there were no credit cards to absorb these shocks, families were forced to build emergency funds with agonizing slowness, squirreling away 50 cents or $1 a week into a hidden jar or a local savings account. The envelope system was not a charming retro budgeting trick. It was a brutal, rigid, and deeply effective survival mechanism. It required the entire family, including the children, to fully understand the absolute limits of their resources. If a child asked for a toy or a treat, the answer wasn't, "We'll put it on the card." The answer was, "It is not in the envelope." This simple, profound phrase taught a generation of children the reality of delayed gratification, a lesson that has been almost entirely eradicated in our modern culture of frictionless, instant consumption. If you grew up in a household that used the physical envelope system, or if you remember your mother sitting at the kitchen table on Friday night doing the household accounting, please share that memory in the comments below. We need to document these practices before they disappear entirely. If the strict, unyielding envelope system governed the daily survival of the mid-century family, how did they possibly afford the large, expensive consumer goods that define the 1950s aesthetic? How did a single-income family, operating entirely on physical cash and terrified of bank debt, manage to purchase a gleaming new Frigidaire refrigerator, a heavy mahogany console television, or even a high-quality wool winter coat? The answer lies in a financial mechanism that has been almost entirely replaced by modern buy now, pay later algorithms and high-interest credit cards. It was a deeply psychological, character-building retail system known as Layaway. To understand Layaway is to understand the fundamental difference between the mid-century mindset of earned ownership and the modern mindset of instant entitlement. Today, if you desire a new television, you walk into a big box store, place the item in your cart, swipe a piece of plastic, and drive home with the television the exact same afternoon. You get to enjoy the product immediately, completely divorced from the pain of having actually earned it. You then spend the next several months or even years paying off the debt long after the initial thrill of the purchase has faded and the television is covered in dust. The 1950s layaway system inverted this entire psychological process. It was built on the principle of pay now, get later. If a housewife needed a new winter coat for her rapidly growing son, she would go to the local Sears, Roebuck & Company, or a downtown department store in late August. She would carefully select the heavy, durable wool coat, but she would not take it home. Instead, she would take it to the layaway desk. The clerk would write out a heavy multi-part carbon copy tag. Half of the tag was physically tied to the sleeve of the coat, and the coat was taken into a dark, secure back stockroom. The other half of the tag, the ledger, was handed to the housewife. She would then make a small initial cash deposit, perhaps $5. And then the ritual began. Every single week or every payday Friday, she would return to that same department store. She would walk up to the layaway counter, present her physical paper ticket, and hand over a $2 bill or a few silver coins. The clerk would meticulously log the payment in a heavy ledger book and stamp her receipt. This process would continue for weeks or sometimes months. The family did not have the coat. The boy was still wearing his old frayed jacket, but they were actively, physically working toward ownership. This forced period of waiting created an intense, building anticipation that is entirely foreign to the modern consumer. The item was not just a purchase, it became a goal, a shared sacrifice that required discipline and focus. When the final payment was eventually made, usually just as the first snow of the season began to fall in November, the experience of bringing that coat home was profound. The clerk would bring the coat out from the back room, remove the heavy tag, and hand it over the counter. The psychological value of that coat was astronomical, precisely because of the immense friction, patience, and prolonged effort required to acquire it. When that boy put the coat on, he knew instinctively that his mother had made 20 separate trips to the store, sacrificing small portions of the weekly budget for months just to put it on his back. Because of this agonizing acquisition process, the item was treated with a level of respect and reverence that we reserve only for family heirlooms today. You did not throw a coat on the floor if it took 3 months to buy it. You hung it up on a wooden hanger, you brushed the wool, and you protected it fiercely. The layaway system taught an entire generation that true value is not found in the instant acquisition of an object, but in the slow, dedicated labor required to earn it. We have traded the deep character-building satisfaction of the final layaway payment for the hollow, fleeting dopamine hit of the Amazon Prime delivery box. And in the process, we have completely forgotten how to respect the things we own. The philosophy of extreme foresight and the absolute rejection of debt extended far beyond the purchase of appliances and winter coats. It deeply infiltrated the most emotionally charged, commercially explosive event of the American year, the Christmas holiday season. To highlight the stark contrast between the financial sanity of the 1950s and the sheer madness of the modern era, We only need to look at how the average family approaches the month of December. Today, the holiday season is a massive, highly orchestrated debt trap. Millions of consumers plunge themselves into deep credit card debt to purchase mountains of cheap, disposable plastic toys and expensive electronics, justifying the financial ruin under the guise of holiday magic. When January arrives, the magic evaporates instantly, replaced by the crushing, anxiety-inducing reality of massive credit card statements and crippling interest rates. The modern holiday is financed by stealing from our future selves. In the 1950s, financing a holiday with borrowed money was not just financially irresponsible, it was culturally unacceptable. You did not celebrate the birth of Christ by going into debt to a bank. Instead, the mid-century family utilized a brilliant, highly disciplined financial tool known as the Christmas Club. The Christmas Club was a specialized short-term savings account offered by almost every local community bank across the United States. The ritual began almost immediately after the previous Christmas had ended, usually in the first freezing weeks of January. A mother or father would walk into their local bank branch and open a Christmas Club account for the upcoming year. The bank would issue them a small, beautifully printed cardboard passbook or a sheet of tear-off coupon slips. The commitment was remarkably small, but required absolute, unwavering consistency. The family committed to depositing a tiny, fixed amount of cash, perhaps 50 cents, $1, or maybe $5 if they were particularly affluent, every single week for 50 weeks. This required the housewife to carve out that specific amount of cash from her Friday envelopes, without fail, rain or shine. Every week she would walk into the bank lobby, hand her small passbook and her 50-cent piece to the teller behind the heavy brass bars. The teller would stamp the book with an ink pad, creating a physical, satisfying record of the growing balance. These accounts typically paid no interest whatsoever. The bank essentially held the money for free. The entire purpose of the Christmas Club was not to generate wealth. It was to provide a rigid, external structure of discipline that prevented the family from spending that money on immediate, daily temptations. It was a psychological trick that the 1950s generation played on themselves to ensure they stayed true to their goals. Then, the magic happened. In late November, just before the Thanksgiving holiday, the bank would mail a physical check to the family's home, or the parents would go to the bank to receive the total accumulated payout in crisp, brand-new paper bills. If a family saved $1 a week, they received $50, a massive, powerful sum of cash in the 1950s economy. This payout was the entire absolute and final budget for the holiday season. It had to cover the Christmas tree, the ingredients for the heavy holiday meal, the wrapping paper, and the gifts for the children. And here is the crucial, forgotten secret of the 1950s Christmas. When that Christmas Club cash ran out, the shopping stopped completely. There were no last-minute trips to the department store armed with a credit card to buy just one more thing. If you had $3 left from the club payout, you found a gift that cost $3, or you made something in the garage. The gifts themselves reflected this constrained, pre-funded reality. Children in the 1950s did not wake up to a living room buried under dozens of boxes. A typical haul might include one big item, a steel tricycle, a model train, or a highly coveted doll, along with practical items like new socks, a winter hat, and an orange or a handful of unshelled walnuts placed in the stocking. Yet, the emotional resonance of that holiday was profound, unclouded by the looming dread of January bills. The parents could sit by the fireplace on Christmas night, watching their children play with their modest toys, experiencing a profound, deep sense of peace. They had provided a beautiful holiday for their family, and they did not owe a single solitary cent to any man or institution on earth. That absolute financial freedom, that peace of mind, was the true gift of the 1950s Christmas. If you remember your parents using a Christmas Club passbook, or if you remember the thrill of getting an orange in your stocking, hit the like button right now and share that story in the comments. We need to remember that the best holidays were not the ones we put on credit. They were the ones we planned for, saved for, and truly owned. To truly understand the immense, crushing psychological pressure of maintaining a cash-only lifestyle in the 1950s, one must first look at the architectural revolution of the mid-century American suburb. The post-war housing boom, perfectly exemplified by developments like Levittown, introduced a new, defining feature to the front of almost every single middle-class home: the massive, unblinking eye of the picture window. Prior to the 1950s, houses were relatively closed off from the street, offering a deep sense of privacy and isolation. But the mid-century modern aesthetic demanded large, expansive panes of glass in the living room, designed to let in natural light and blur the line between the indoors and the outdoors. However, this architectural choice had a profound, unintended psychological consequence. The picture window effectively turned the family living room into a brightly lit public theatrical stage. It invited the entire neighborhood to look inside, to judge, and to evaluate the financial success of the family living there. This era birthed the infamous phrase, "keeping up with the Joneses." The pressure to present a flawless, prosperous image to the outside world was absolute. You were expected to have a clean, perfectly appointed living room with a matching sofa set, a polished coffee table, and a gleaming television console. But here was the devastating contradiction that millions of housewives faced every single day. How do you maintain the glittering, expensive illusion of the post-war consumer dream when you are strictly operating on a working-class, single-income, cash-only envelope system? The math simply did not work. You could not walk into a high-end department store, pay full retail price in cash for a brand new, modern living room set, and still have money left in the envelopes for the mortgage, the heating coal, and the children's groceries. The solution to this impossible equation was the creation of a massive, highly active, and deeply secretive second-hand economy. Today, buying vintage furniture, shopping at local thrift stores, or utilizing online resale marketplaces is considered trendy, environmentally conscious, and financially savvy. People openly brag about the amazing deals they find on used clothing or antique tables. But in the 1950s, purchasing used goods was accompanied by a suffocating, humiliating stigma. Buying secondhand was seen as a public admission of financial failure, a desperate last resort for the impoverished. It was something to be deeply ashamed of, and therefore, it was done in the absolute shadows. When a 1950s housewife needed to furnish that picture window living room on a strict cash budget, she did not go to the local thrift store in her own town. The risk of being seen by a neighbor from church or the PTA was simply too great. Instead, she would take a bus or drive the family car 2 or 3 towns over, deliberately traveling out of her social circle to hunt for used furniture in back alley shops or through classified newspaper ads. When she found an old, sturdy, but perhaps ugly or outdated sofa that fit her limited cash budget, the real labor began. She would have it delivered through the back alley or the garage door after dark, so the neighbors wouldn't see a used piece of furniture entering the house. Then, she would spend weeks of her incredibly scarce free time completely rebuilding the piece. She would strip the old fabric, buy discounted yards of heavy upholstery material, often from factory outlet bins, and painstakingly reupholster the entire sofa by hand, hiding the old wood, reinforcing the springs, and making it look exactly like the brand new models featured in the Sears catalog. This secretive economy applied intensely to children's clothing as well. While the outer coats might be bought on a grueling layaway plan to present a good public image, the everyday play clothes, the school pants, and the winter sweaters were very often secondhand. But a proud mother would never let her child walk out the front door looking like they were wearing someone else's cast-offs. The clothing was subjected to a rigorous process of domestic laundering. Faded fabrics were re-dyed in the kitchen sink using hot water and cheap packets of chemical dye to make them look vibrant and new again. Buttons that didn't match were carefully removed and replaced with uniform sets saved in a glass jar. Hems were raised or lowered to achieve the perfect fit, hiding the fact that the trousers were originally meant for a taller, older boy 2 streets over. The sheer volume of hidden, exhausting physical labor required to participate in this secret economy was astronomical. The 1950s housewife had to be an interior decorator, a master upholsterer, a seamstress, and a chemical dyer, all to protect the family from the devastating social judgment of the picture window. They managed to perfectly project the illusion of unlimited prosperity, entirely funded by small scraps of cash and a mountain of secret sweat. If you ever found out later in life that your beautiful childhood home was actually furnished with heavily disguised secondhand items, tell us about that realization in the comments. Let's peel back the curtain on this hidden history. The intense, culturally mandated aversion to consumer debt in the 1950s was deeply intertwined with another massive psychological hurdle, a profound, lingering mistrust of the American banking system itself. Today, our money is entirely ethereal. It exists as encrypted data floating in digital clouds, insured by federal agencies and accessible globally within milliseconds. We implicitly trust that when we log into our banking apps, our digital numbers will still be there. But the generation that built the 1950s had experienced the horrific, tangible reality of that trust being violently broken. The bank failures of the early 1930s were not just an economic downturn. They were a catastrophic betrayal of the American public. Millions of families had dutifully deposited their hard-earned cash into marble-floored institutions, trusting the men in the fine suits, only to discover one morning that the vaults were empty, the doors were chained shut, and their life savings were gone forever, completely uninsured and unrecoverable. You cannot experience that level of systemic betrayal and simply go back to trusting banks unconditionally. Even though the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, had been established to insure deposits, the psychological scar tissue remained thick and highly sensitive. As a direct result of this trauma, a significant portion of the cash circulating in the 1950s economy never actually saw the inside of a bank vault. Instead, it was secreted away in the most bizarre, elaborate, and highly guarded hiding spots within the physical structure of the suburban home. The concept of hiding money under the mattress is often used today as a humorous, exaggerated cliché, but in the mid-century working-class household, it was a literal, deadly serious reality. Families felt a primal need to have immediate physical access to their wealth in the event of another sudden economic collapse. This money was not the weekly operational cash from the envelope system. This was the deep savings, the emergency fund, the rainy day accumulation that represented the family's ultimate safety net against the harshness of the world. Because this money was physical, often consisting of large denomination bills or heavy solid silver coins that possessed intrinsic value, it had to be physically protected from fire, from theft, and sometimes even from other members of the family. The ingenuity of these domestic hiding spots was staggering, born from a potent mixture of economic paranoia and sheer desperation. The freezer was a remarkably common vault. Housewives would take a thick stack of paper bills, wrap them tightly in multiple layers of heavy wax paper or aluminum foil, place them at the very bottom of a repurposed metal coffee tin, and then fill the rest of the tin with rendered bacon grease or leftover soup before freezing the entire block solid. To a casual burglar, it looked like nothing more than frozen kitchen waste, but buried within that ice was $500 of crucial survival capital. Men would use their mechanical skills to create hidden compartments in the architecture of the house itself. They would carefully pry up a specific, inconspicuous floorboard in the back of a bedroom closet, carve out a shallow depression in the floor joist beneath, lay a flat tin box filled with silver certificates into the cavity, and nail the board back down, knowing exactly which nail to pull to retrieve it. Hollowed out books on the living room shelf, false bottoms in heavy oak toolboxes, and money physically sewn into the thick, heavy bottom hems of living room curtains were all genuine, widely utilized strategies for protecting the family's net worth. This practice created a uniquely mid-century phenomenon and a uniquely tragic one: the lost inheritance. Because this financial paranoia was deeply rooted in secrecy, parents rarely told their young children where the emergency funds were actually hidden. The fear was that a child might accidentally mention the coffee can full of money to a friend at school, inviting a robbery. As a result, when the parents eventually aged and passed away, the surviving children were often left with a terrifying, exhausting treasure hunt. When a house from the 1950s was being cleared out for an estate sale in the 1980s or 90s, families literally had to tear the architecture apart, They had to rip up the carpets to check the floorboards, slice open the mattresses, empty every single stale box of cereal in the pantry, and thaw out every suspicious container in the deep freezer. There are countless documented stories of antique dealers or new homeowners finding thousands of dollars in silver coins and old oversized paper bills hidden behind the drywall of a basement or taped to the inside of a cold air return vent. The physical money remained, trapped in the dark, a silent, enduring testament to a generation that believed security could only be achieved if you could hold it in your hands and hide it from the world. If you appreciate learning about the intense hidden psychology behind these forgotten American habits, make sure you are subscribed to the channel right now, because we are dedicated to documenting the history that the textbooks leave out. If the mid-century family was pouring every ounce of their physical energy into maintaining their clothing, stretching their food budget, managing a rigid cash envelope system, and hiding their emergency savings in the floorboards, a fascinating question arises. How did they possibly afford to entertain themselves? In the modern era, our concept of leisure and weekend entertainment is almost entirely inextricably linked to commercial spending. We define our time off by the money we consume. A typical modern weekend involves spending hundreds of dollars on overpriced brunch at aesthetic restaurants, subscribing to 5 different streaming services, buying tickets to massive amusement parks, drinking at expensive cocktail bars, or wandering through vast air-conditioned shopping malls to engage in recreational retail therapy. If you were to take a modern family and strip away their credit cards, Apple Pay, and digital wallets, their weekend would grind to a miserable, paralyzing halt. They would have absolutely no idea how to socialize without a financial transaction taking place. But for the cash-strapped, debt-terrified family of the 1950s, spending actual physical cash on mere entertainment was viewed as a frivolous, almost sinful waste of resources. Therefore, they had to cultivate a completely different, entirely demonetized culture of leisure. They had to master the lost art of the zero-budget weekend. The epicenter of this non-commercial social life was the front porch culture, a phenomenon that has been completely eradicated by the invention of central air conditioning and the internet. In the 1950s, summer evenings were brutally hot and humid inside poorly insulated houses. So, after the dinner dishes were washed, the entire family moved outside. Adults sat on heavy metal lawn chairs or wooden porch gliders, while children played kick the can or chased fireflies in the fading light. But this wasn't just about cooling down. This was the primary social network of the era. Neighbors would walk down the sidewalk, stopping at every porch to share news, gossip, and local information. There were no expensive appetizers or craft cocktails served. You might be offered a glass of tap water over chipped ice, or perhaps a pitcher of cheap powdered Kool-Aid. The entertainment was the human connection itself. It cost absolutely nothing to sit in the warm evening air and talk to the people who lived 50 feet away from you. Communities were incredibly tight-knit, not out of some utopian mid-century magic, but out of sheer economic necessity. You couldn't afford to escape your neighbors by flying to a resort, so you learned to live with them, rely on them, and be entertained by them. When the family did want to leave the neighborhood, they engaged in the great lost American tradition of the Sunday drive. Gasoline in the 1950s was incredibly cheap, making the family automobile the ultimate tool for affordable leisure. On a Sunday afternoon, the father would pack the family into the heavy steel sedan, and they would simply drive. They drove out of the suburbs into the countryside, looking at farmhouses, exploring new housing developments, or driving out to a local lake. But here's the crucial, forgotten detail of the Sunday drive. They almost never stopped at a restaurant. Paying a business to cook food for you was an immense luxury. Instead, the mother would spend Sunday morning preparing a heavy insulated metal picnic cooler. She would pack sandwiches tightly wrapped in thick wax paper, a large thermos filled with hot coffee, hard-boiled eggs, and perhaps a cheap homemade pound cake. When the family got hungry, they would pull the car over onto the grassy shoulder of a rural road, spread a heavy wool blanket over the hood of the car on the ground, and eat their homemade food. The entire afternoon of exploration, scenery, and family bonding cost nothing more than 50 cents in gasoline and the ingredients they already had in the kitchen. The social calendar of the mid-century was also heavily anchored by civic and religious institutions that demanded time and physical presence rather than cash. The church basement was the undisputed center of community entertainment. Wednesday night potluck dinners, where every family brought a cheap filling casserole or a towering, inexpensive gelatin mold, provided an evening of heavy eating and deep socialization without a restaurant bill. Local public libraries were treated as sacred temples of free entertainment, where children could spend hours escaping into books without spending a dime. Men gathered in garages to tinker with carburetors and share tools, turning mechanical repair into a cheap social club. The 1950s family experienced a rich, deeply connected, and deeply fulfilling social life entirely outside the boundaries of the commercial retail market. They did not need a credit card to buy happiness or connection. We look back at them and think their lives must have been boring without our modern screens and endless consumer options. But the truth is, they possessed a profound sense of community that our modern debt-financed society has completely lost. If you remember going on a long Sunday drive with the picnic cooler in the trunk, please drop a comment and tell me where your family used to go. It's important to remember how little it actually takes to create a perfect weekend. If the envelope system was so effective, if the layaway plans built such strong financial character, and if the cash-only lifestyle provided such a deep sense of security and community, a monumental question remains. What happened? How did we transition from a society of fierce, terrified savers to a society drowning in trillions of dollars of unsecured consumer debt? How did the profound, character-defining frugality of the 1950s completely vanish from the American landscape? The answer lies in a calculated, brilliant, and ultimately devastating psychological hack engineered by the banking industry. A hack that successfully bypassed the trauma of the Great Depression and completely rewired the human brain's relationship with money. The death of the cash-only dream did not happen overnight, but its execution was swift, and it was delivered on a small, rectangular piece of stamped plastic. The assault on the cash-only mindset began in the early 1950s with the introduction of the Diners Club card, initially designed as a niche convenience product for wealthy, traveling businessmen who needed to entertain clients at high-end restaurants without carrying massive stacks of physical cash. But the true, devastating revolution occurred in 1958, an event known in financial history as the Fresno Drop. The Bank of America, desperate to find a way to make average working-class consumers borrow money, launched an unprecedented experiment in Fresno, California. They did not wait for customers to come into the bank and apply for a loan. Instead, they loaded 60,000 brand-new, active, ready-to-use Bank Americards into the mail system and sent them directly to the homes of average citizens. They essentially mailed unsolicited, unsecured debt straight to the kitchen tables of America. It was a massive gamble, but the banking executives understood something dark and profound about human psychology. If you remove the physical pain of handing over a paper dollar, you completely destroy the friction of spending. When a 1950s housewife used the envelope system, the act of spending triggered a literal physical sense of loss. She saw the stack of bills get thinner, but a credit card severed that neurological connection. Suddenly, you could walk into a department store, hand a piece of plastic to a clerk, take the winter coat home immediately, and the plastic card was handed right back to you. Your wallet felt exactly the same weight walking out of the store as it did walking in. The psychological pain of the transaction was entirely delayed, pushed off into a vague, distant future. For a generation exhausted by decades of relentless budgeting, darning, rationing, and saving, this new technology was an incredibly seductive, dangerous narcotic. It offered the immediate glittering illusion of wealth without the agonizing slow labor of the layaway plan. It promised the ability to finally, truly, keep up with the Joneses without the humiliation of buying a second-hand sofa and reupholstering it in the garage at midnight. But the true shift occurred when the torch was passed to the next generation. The baby boomers, born into the relative safety and explosive abundance of the post-war era, did not carry the psychological scars of the Great Depression. They had not seen the banks fail. They had not eaten flour gravy to survive. They looked at their parents' obsessive envelope systems, their washed bandages, their buried coffee cans of silver coins, and their intense fear of debt not as a noble survival strategy, but as an embarrassing, outdated, and needlessly painful neurosis. The younger generation enthusiastically embraced the frictionless, debt-fueled lifestyle promised by the plastic cards. They rejected the slow, agonizing weight of saving up cash, demanding instant gratification, immediate upgrades, and immediate lifestyle parity with their peers. The era of make do and mend was economically assassinated by the era of buy now, pay later. We are now living in the absolute climax of that plastic revolution. The modern economy is a towering, precarious house of cards built almost entirely on consumer debt. We have normalized carrying thousands of dollars in credit card balances, paying exorbitant interest rates simply to maintain a lifestyle we cannot actually afford with our physical labor. We have traded the deep, quiet, unbreakable financial security of the 1950s for the constant, low-level hum of modern financial anxiety. We mock our grandparents for washing plastic bags and hiding money in the freezer, failing to realize that they possessed a profound, dignified financial freedom that most of us will never achieve. They owned their lives. We are merely renting ours from the banks. The story of the 1950s cash-only economy is not just a nostalgic look at envelopes, layaway tickets, and Sunday drives. It is a powerful, urgent warning. It is a reminder that true security does not come from a credit limit. It comes from discipline, patience, and the profound ability to say no when the envelope is empty. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the hidden financial history of America with me today. Investigating these forgotten realities takes a massive amount of research, and the only way this archive survives is through your direct support. If this video changed the way you view your own relationship with money, please subscribe to Vanished Americana right now. Hit that like button to help push this history out to more people. And before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think you could survive for 1 month using only physical cash and paper envelopes? Let's start a conversation down below. Until next time, take a long, hard look at the plastic cards in your wallet and ask yourself who is really in control. See you in the next video.